I'd like you to give a round of applause for our first speaker. Oh. Bobby Khaleque is a student, a third-year student at iGGi, as I said, at Queen Mary University of London, and he'd like to present his work on exploration games, and specifically the concept of player interests. He will investigate these concepts and come up with techniques on how to evaluate it. Bobby, the floor is yours.
Oh, cheers. Cheers, Eunice. So, hey everyone. Sorry. Thank you. Hey everyone, welcome to my presentation on evaluating exploratory experiences. So, just to give a brief intro into my project.
Could you hold the mic up a bit?
Oh, yeah, sorry. Brief intro into my project. So what actually are exploratory experiences? They're usually experiences which focus on exploration or traversal of an environment. It can be 2D or 3D, but my research focuses on 3D. And there's generally little to no interaction. It's just exploration and traversal, but some can have simple interactions like opening doors or solving simple puzzles. So yeah, like I said, think of games like Gone Home, Journey, and Proteus. They can further be subdivided into 3 types of experiences. The first being pure exploratory experiences, where you're just exploring a space. So my favorite example, Proteus, where you explore a procedurally generated 3D island and there's no interaction aside from traversal. Then we have story-based exploratory experiences, where one or more themes or narratives might be revealed. So in a game like Journey, it reveals the themes and narratives of the journey to the top of the mountain, and there's a few simple puzzles and interactivity such as jumping and being able to journey with another player. Then we have other exploratory experiences. So these are essentially games or media which might have an element of exploration and traversal within them. So you can think of stuff like the Outer Wilds, where there's much more complex mechanics and puzzles, lots of interaction and deciphering required, and you have the time loop mechanic as well. So how exactly might we evaluate an exploratory experiences? They're quite atypical to most games and media, in the sense that the main gameplay element is just traversal. Therefore, you can postulate that the environment must support the element for EE to be for an EE to be high quality. Now there's been quite a lot of theory about level design, and they're mostly concerned about intertwining it with other elements such as combat or other types of encounters. However, in exploratory experiences or EEs, we're looking for design techniques which might draw players in for exploration, or in other words, how interesting an environment might be. So I'm going to talk about interest for a bit. So what I mean by interest in this context is trying to model complex human behavior to provide a reward function which the AI agents, which I'm currently developing, can use to say if the environment is interesting or not. So at the moment, it's hard to quantify interest as a number because we don't really have any relevant research as to why people would explore these environments, but we can get some sort of common sense, intuitive approach to it. So in EEs, there's multiple design techniques used for levels which might incite exploration, and I'm just going to go through them right now. So what are these techniques? We have a few which I'm going to briefly talk about and then show some examples where it might be applicable. So yeah, we have visual density and scene complexity, so the amount of objects there is to look at in a level or a scene. Visual diversity, the different types of objects there is to look at, and the amount of objects that are visually distinguishable, which are landmarks, and being able to be recognized from afar. So let's take a look at a good example of visual density. I'm just going to take a Breath of the Wild, though not strictly exploratory experience. Just walking out from the Great Plateau and walking up the hill, there's a bunch of objects to look at in a very wide open space. So you've got the forest dense with trees, significant landmarks in the background, like Death Mountain, Hyrule Castle. It just incites the player to just go exploring, what it did for me at least. See what's in the forest, maybe check out the hills, also go to the mountain, wherever. So it's also a good example for visual diversity in the sense there's a lot of different types of objects there. There's obviously a lot more design techniques and design techniques being used here, but I can't really mention them due to time. But the visual density and diversity techniques and landmarks really do contribute to making an interesting looking environment. Another example is from the outer world, especially for seeing complexity. There's again a lot of objects to look at on the screen. There's the main landmark of the observatory, the trees littering the place, and yeah, again, there's just quite a few objects to look at given the scale of the scene, and maybe less negative space compared to the previous example. Oh, sorry.
What did you say? Oh, that one.
Is this better? All right.
Okay, that's good. So where was I? Cool. So a couple more factors I've identified. The use of anticipation. That means creating a path or incentive for a player to explore. So it can be done using landmarks, as I mentioned previously, you saw in previous examples, or completely and partially excluding objects from space to create some sort of incentive to a player to maybe peek around a corner and take a whole view of other objects or landmarks. Cool, so more examples. So again, we have proteins here. This is good for occluding, or rather partially occluding objects in space. You can see here. So the fog has been used to occlude parts of the island, and this might be done to save performance, but it also has the side effect of incentivizing the player to maybe go see what's down there, get a better view over the big hill, which partially occludes the forest as well. Might encourage the players to go to the top of the hill and get a better view around it or the surroundings. Cool. So another smaller example is from a game called Shutterstraw. It's free on the iGGi store. But you notice a partial occlusion of objects in this scene, particularly from the trees and rocks. This might incentivize the player to move towards these objects to get better viewpoints, or to maybe get a more clear view of the scene and the objects. So again, I mentioned I've only covered a small portion of what might go into creating interest for exploratory experiences, but if anyone has any suggestions at the end, I'm more than willing to listen. So, just going to talk a bit about my current and future work in this project. So, trying to develop interest measures. So the aforementioned features should be quantified to form multiple or a single interest reward function for an AI to basically drop into a level and say, okay, how interesting is this? The next step is to determine, okay, how might I quantify the factors I previously mentioned? And like I said, it can be multiple factors to produce multiple versions of interest measures. So if anyone wants to check out some very preliminary interest measures and some AI agents, I have my project available on GitHub, which is linked on my end slide and my poster as well. Now, you might be thinking right now, is an interest a very subjective thing? Why do I get to decide what constitutes interest for exploratory experiences? My response to that would be, probably won't just be me. I'm planning on having user studies on sets of levels, maybe designed by a professional or something, which might be considered interesting or uninteresting, which I'm going to hand over to people who might like exploratory experiences and, use that data to help identify some techniques which might make these types of experiences interesting. And, another side to this is, of course, it's very subjective, but I'm planning to also build a tool which any designer might be able to use, and that designer can tweak the interest measures which I might provide as a base until they're satisfied with it, and even add their own. Cool. So we can use these measures to help develop interest in levels, like I said. So the AI could help build better level generators or help developers figure out how interesting their levels are. But as I mentioned, we need a ground truth, which is why part of my project is to build a sample set of interesting and uninteresting levels. And these will help hopefully validate what the agents I'm going to develop are finding out, and whether they actually hold up to interesting or not so interesting levels. Another crucial and future plan is to implement some agents, which I mentioned before. I've developed to evaluate the test set of levels, and yeah, like I said, they're all free on GitHub. The idea of these agents is to basically, they can be dragged and dropped into any kind of level, and within a few seconds or a few minutes, they can give a number on how interesting they might be. So that might help level generators as well. Cool. So in conclusion, I've talked about the various design techniques used by EEs that might incite players to explore a level, like anticipation, visual density, and layout density. These design techniques might be quantified to form interest measures, which can be used to evaluate levels based on how interesting they are to explore. And we've talked about framework with preliminary interest measures, agents, and test set of levels, which is currently being developed to test out that theory. Okay, thank you for listening. Here's my contact details. I'll take any questions now.